My parents secretly saddled me with $135,000 debt to fund my brother's wild dreams. But I refused, and Phoenix summers are no joke, and in my cramped one-bedroom apartment, the air conditioning worked overtime trying to keep me from melting. I'd just come home from my internship, exhausted but proud. At 24, I was finally starting to feel like I was on the right track. College was behind me, and the late nights of cramming and coffee-fueled panic attacks had paid off. My diploma hung on the wall, a symbol of everything I had pushed through to get here. My phone buzzed on the desk, an email notification. I was too tired to check it immediately, assuming it was some generic message from the bank, maybe a reminder about my next student loan payment. It wasn't until I sat down with a reheated slice of pizza and clicked open the email that my world tilted. Dear Mr. Taylor, your outstanding loan balance is $135,000. Your next payment is due. I stopped reading. My chest tightened, and my eyes locked on the number. It didn't make sense. I knew exactly how much my college tuition had been. $50,000. My partial scholarship had knocked $20,000 off that, and I'd worked part-time to cover the rest. The numbers didn't add up, no matter how I looked at them. I refreshed the email, half hoping it would disappear. No luck. Panic set in as I scrambled to open my loan account online. The figure was there, staring back at me like a threat. $135,000. My heart pounded, and I tried to piece it together. Had there been some kind of mistake? A technical glitch? A typo? As my mind raced, I found myself dialing my mom's number. The one person who always seemed to have an answer. Hi, sweetie. Mom answered, her voice bright and cheerful. I could hear the sound of a TV in the background, some cooking show she loved to watch. Mom, I just got an email from the bank, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. They're saying I owe $135,000 in student loans. That can't be right. There was a pause. Not the concerned, attentive kind of pause you expect from a parent, but the kind that made my stomach drop. She said casually, that doesn't sound right. Are you sure it's not a mistake? I checked the account. It's real, Mom. What's going on? Did you or Dad do something with my loans? Oh, honey, she said, brushing it off. Don't stress. It's probably just a mix-up. We'll sort it out. Her words were meant to be reassuring, but they only made me more suspicious. My parents weren't the type to be careless with money, but they also weren't the type to fully explain things either. Mom, I need you to be honest with me, I pressed. Did you and Dad take out more money than I needed for school? Like, the full amount of the loans? Another pause. This one longer, heavier. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head as she tried to decide what to say. Well, she finally admitted, her tone quieter now. We might have taken out the full amount, just to make sure you had enough, in case your scholarship didn't cover everything. What? My voice rose before I could stop it. Mom, my scholarship covered most of my tuition, and I've been working to cover the rest. Why would you take out more than I needed? Her hesitation was answer enough, but when she spoke again, her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Well, your brother needed some help too, Ryan, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. What does Ryan have to do with my student loans? Sweetie, she said, her tone shifting into that patronizing register I'd always hated. Ryan's been struggling with his music career. He needed a little financial support, and we thought it was only fair to help him out, too. My head was spinning. Ryan, my 28-year-old brother, had dropped out of college years ago to chase his dream of becoming a musician. I'd always supported him, cheered him on from the sidelines, even when he moved back home after his third failed gig tour. But this? Mom, you're telling me you took out extra money in my name and gave it to Ryan? It's not as bad as it sounds, she said quickly. We were just trying to give both of you the best chance to succeed. We didn't think it would be a big deal. Not a big deal. My voice cracked. It's $135,000, Mom. I'm 24. I just started working. How am I supposed to pay this off? We'll figure it out, she said, brushing me off again. Don't stress yourself over it. We'll talk more about this later. But I couldn't wait for later. The weight of what she just admitted was too much. Without saying goodbye, I hung up and slammed my phone on the desk. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't stop the rising tide of anger and disbelief. They had taken out $135,000 in my name, without telling me. And for what? So my brother could blow it on studio time and road trips while I was scraping by, working late shifts at a diner to make ends meet? I stared at the email again, the number glaring at me like a prison sentence. This wasn't just a mistake. It was betrayal. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that number. I thought about Ryan, about my parents, about how they could have done this to me without so much as a conversation. By morning, I knew one thing for sure. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I grabbed my car keys and headed for my parents' house. If they thought they could sweep this under the rug, they were wrong. This was my future on the line, and I wasn't going to let it slip away without a fight. I pulled into the driveway of my parents' suburban home in the heart of Phoenix, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where people watered their lawns at the crack of dawn and waved at every passing car. It was the last place you'd expect to find this kind of chaos brewing. I slammed the car door shut and marched to the front door. My stomach churned with a mix of anger and anxiety, but I pushed it down. This wasn't the time for hesitation. I needed answers. The door swung open before I even knocked. My mom stood there, her face a mix of guilt and nervousness. She always had a way of acting like everything was fine, but her eyes gave her away. "Alex, honey, I wasn't expecting you so early," she said, forcing a smile. "We need to talk," I said, pushing past her into the house. The living room looked exactly as it always had. The same beige couch, the same family photos on the wall, the same faint smell of my mom's lavender-scented candles. It all felt so normal, which only made me angrier. My dad was in his recliner, flipping through the channels on the TV. He looked up, surprised to see me, but didn't say a word. My older brother Ryan was sprawled out on the couch, strumming his acoustic guitar and humming some tune under his breath. "Ryan," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut through the air. He looked up, confused. "What's up, little bro?" I ignored him and turned to my parents. "We need to talk. Now." My dad muted the TV and sighed, leaning back in his chair like this was some kind of inconvenience. "What's this about?" I clenched my fists to keep from losing it right there. "It's about the $135,000 in student loans you took out in my name, and the $70,000 of it that went to Ryan." Ryan stopped strumming his guitar and stared at me, wide-eyed. "Wait, what?" "Don't play dumb," I snapped. "Mom already told me. The bank says I owe $135,000. That's way more than my tuition. She said you used some of the loan for Ryan." My mom winced like I just hit her. My dad frowned, shaking his head. "Look, Alex, we were just trying to help you both out. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal." "A big deal?" My voice cracked, rising despite my effort to stay calm. "You put me in six-figure debt without even telling me. How is that not a big deal?" My mom wrung her hands, avoiding eye contact. "We didn't think it would turn out like this. We just wanted to make sure Ryan had a chance to succeed, too. Ryan didn't even go to college." I shouted, pointing at him. "He's been sitting around playing his guitar and crashing at your place while I busted my ass working and studying. And you think it's fair to dump this on me?" Ryan finally spoke up, his voice defensive. "Hey, don't drag me into this. I didn't ask them to do that. Are you kidding me?" I snapped. "You didn't say no, either. Did you even ask where the money was coming from when they handed it to you?" Ryan shrugged, avoiding my glare. "I just thought they were helping me out, man. I didn't think it was a big deal." "Not a big deal," I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "Of course, it's not a big deal for you. You're not the one paying it back." My dad stood up, his face stern. "Alex, enough. We did this for the family. Ryan needed help, and we thought you'd understand." "Understand?" I said, my voice shaking. "You've got to be kidding me. You didn't even bother to tell me. You just went behind my back and signed me up for a lifetime of debt. How am I supposed to understand that?" My mom started to cry, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "We didn't mean to hurt you, Alex. We thought we were doing the right thing." "The right thing?" I shouted. "You've completely screwed me over. I worked so hard to get through college, to do everything the right way, and now I'm starting my career buried under a mountain of debt that isn't even mine. My dad stepped closer, his voice rising. Don't take that tone with your mother. We always tried to do what's best for you kids. Yeah, I said, meeting his glare. Because it sure doesn't feel like it. It feels like I'm just the backup plan when Ryan's dreams don't pan out. Ryan stood up now, his face red. You don't know what you're talking about, Alex. I've been working my ass off, trying to make it in the music industry. You think it's easy? You're right, Ryan. I don't know what it's like, I said, my voice cold. Because I've been too busy paying for my own life instead of mooching off mom and dad. Ryan's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. I turned back to my parents. I want to know exactly how much of this loan went to Ryan and why you didn't take it out in his name. He's 28, for God's sake. He's old enough to deal with his own finances. My mom sniffled, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't have the credit or the grades to qualify for a loan. We didn't have any other options. I let out a bitter laugh. So, you thought, hey, let's just dump it on Alex. He'll figure it out. That's not what we thought, my dad said, his tone defensive. Then what did you think? I said, my voice rising again. That I'd just roll over and accept it? That I wouldn't notice? The room fell silent. My mom looked at the floor, my dad stared at me like I was the problem, and Ryan crossed his arms, refusing to engage. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady despite the anger boiling inside me. I'm not paying back a single cent of that $70,000 you gave to Ryan. You figure out how to fix this, or I'll take legal action. I don't care what it does to this family. I'm done being the scapegoat. I didn't wait for a response. I grabbed my keys and walked out, slamming the door behind me. As I drove away, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. Part of me felt guilty for how harsh I'd been, but the other part knew I had no choice. This wasn't just about the money. It was about trust, respect, and the years of resentment I'd been pushing down. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let them walk all over me. This time, I was standing up for myself, no matter what it cost. Driving back to my apartment after that showdown with my parents, my anger was like a slow burn in my chest. I couldn't stop replaying the conversation in my head. My dad's dismissive tone, my mom's tears, and Ryan's indifference. It all swirled together like a storm I couldn't escape. When I got home, I collapsed onto the couch, my mind racing. I was angry, sure, but underneath that was a raw sense of betrayal. They were my family. They were supposed to protect me, not set me up to fail. I stayed up that night, researching everything I could about loans, legal rights, and what options I might have. I didn't know where to start, so I typed student loan fraud by parents into Google. The results were both terrifying and oddly comforting. I wasn't alone. There were forums full of stories like mine. It didn't make me feel better, but at least I wasn't the first person to be thrown under the bus by the people who were supposed to care for them. By the time the sun came up, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to let this slide. My parents might have thought they could guilt-trip me into silence, but they underestimated just how determined I could be. The next morning, I called a lawyer. His name was Daniel Shaw, a no-nonsense guy with a gravelly voice and a track record of handling messy family disputes. I explained everything, from the suspiciously high loan amount to the money funneled to Ryan without my consent. Do you have any documentation? He asked after I finished my rant. I think so, I said, racking my brain. Emails, loan statements, maybe some bank records. I just need to dig it all up. Good, Daniel said. Bring everything you've got. This isn't an uncommon situation, but it's tricky. You'll need solid evidence if you want to move forward. I hung up feeling equal parts relieved and terrified. This wasn't just a family argument anymore. It was a legal matter, and I was preparing to go up against my own parents. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and late nights. I dug through every file, every email, every scrap of evidence I could find. The more I uncovered, the worse it got. The loan documents showed my signature in places I didn't remember signing. Bank records revealed transfers I hadn't authorized. But the worst part was realizing just how calculated it all was. My parents had planned this, or at least gone along with it knowing full well what they were doing. And Ryan. He'd just taken the money and spent it without a second thought. I tried not to dwell on the betrayal. It didn't matter how much it hurt. I had to focus on protecting myself. When I finally had everything ready, I called my parents to let them know where things stood. "Mom, Dad," I said over the phone, my voice calm but firm, "we need to talk again. This time, I want you to come to my apartment." My mom hesitated. "Alex, do we really need to drag this out? We can work something out, I'm sure of it." "We're past that," I said, cutting her off. "I've spoken to a lawyer. I'm giving you one last chance to explain yourselves and come up with a plan to fix this before I take legal action." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Fine," my dad finally said, his tone cold. "We'll be there tonight." They arrived just after dinner, walking into my apartment like they were stepping into enemy territory. My mom looked nervous, clutching her purse like it was a shield. My dad's face was set in a grim scowl. "Let's sit," I said, motioning to the small dining table in the corner of the room. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I've gone through all the loan documents," I began. "I've got proof that you took out more than I needed, proof that the extra money went to Ryan, and proof that you forged my signature on some of the paperwork." My mom's face paled. "Alex, we didn't forge anything. You signed those papers." "I signed them when I was 18, I said, my voice rising. "You told me it was just to handle my tuition. You didn't tell me you were using them to take out extra money for Ryan." My dad leaned forward, his voice sharp. "We didn't forge anything, and we didn't mean for this to happen. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." "A molehill?" I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You put me $135,000 in debt. This isn't a molehill. It's my entire future." My mom tried to interject, her voice trembling. "Alex, we thought we were doing what was best for the family. Ryan needed help, and we didn't have any other options." "You had options," I said, glaring at them. "You could have taken out a loan in his name. You could have talked to me about it. Instead, you decided to gamble my future without even asking me." "We didn't think it would turn out like this," my mom said, tears streaming down her face. "Well, it did," I said, standing up and pacing the room. "And now I'm the one who has to deal with it." The room was silent for a moment. My dad rubbed his temples, and my mom sobbed quietly into her hands. "I'm not paying for Ryan's mistakes," I said finally, my voice steady. "I'm giving you 3 weeks to figure out how to repay the $70,000 you took. If you don't, I'm taking legal action." My dad's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. "You take us to court? Your own parents?" "I don't want to," I said, "but you've left me no choice. This isn't just about money. It's about trust. And right now, I don't trust you to do the right thing unless I force you to." My mom reached out, her voice pleading. "Alex, please. We're your parents. We never wanted to hurt you." "You already have," I said, my voice breaking. "And now it's your turn to fix it." I walked to the door and opened it, signaling that the conversation was over. My parents exchanged a look, then stood and walked out without another word. As the door closed behind them, I leaned against it, my legs shaking. I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief because I'd finally stood up for myself. Sadness because I knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same. The days following that confrontation felt like I was walking through quicksand. Every step forward seemed like it took twice as much energy as it should. I was drained, emotionally and physically, but there was no room to slow down. If my parents thought I wasn't serious about taking this to court, they were in for a rude awakening. I spent my evenings with my lawyer, Daniel Shaw, sorting through every document, email, and bank statement I could find. Each piece of evidence felt like a brick in a wall I was building. Solid, unshakable. It was the only thing that gave me any sense of control in a situation where everything else felt like it was spiraling out of my grasp. 3 weeks came and went with nothing but silence from my parents. No calls, no texts, not even a half-hearted apology. It was like they were waiting for me to blink first. When the deadline I'd given them passed, I scheduled another meeting with Daniel. We sat across from each other in his small, cluttered office downtown. The hum of the old air conditioner filled the silence as I handed him a folder of everything I'd collected. "Looks good," he said, flipping through the pages. We have a solid case here. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Once we file, there's no going back. I hesitated for only a moment. This wasn't a decision I'd made lightly. They left me no choice, I said. If I let this slide, I'll be stuck with this debt for the rest of my life. They've made it clear they're not going to take responsibility unless I force them to. Daniel nodded and leaned back in his chair. Fair enough. Let's get started. The next day, I officially filed the lawsuit. The paperwork alone felt like a mountain, but with Daniel's guidance, we navigated it all. Once it was done, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, anger, and sadness, all jumbled together. It felt surreal. I thought filing the lawsuit would be the hardest part, but I was wrong. The hardest part came after, when word started spreading through the family. It didn't take long for the calls and texts to start rolling in. My mom must have told everyone, because suddenly, I was public enemy #1 in the Taylor family. A lawsuit? Against your own parents? My Aunt Linda said over the phone, her tone dripping with disapproval. Family should come first, Alex. This is just wrong. Where was that energy when they dumped 6 figures of debt on me? I shot back. She didn't have an answer for that, and hung up after muttering something about me being selfish. The calls kept coming, some from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Most of them took my parents' side, accusing me of tearing the family apart. A few cousins reached out to say they understood, but even they sounded hesitant, like they didn't want to get too involved. It was exhausting, and for the first time, I realized just how isolating it was to stand up for myself. I wasn't just fighting my parents anymore. I was fighting an entire network of people who thought I should let it go for the sake of family harmony. The only people who really had my back were my best friend, Sarah, and my girlfriend, Rachel. They listened to my rants, helped me stay focused, and reminded me why I was doing this when the guilt started creeping in. You're doing the right thing, Rachel said one night as we sat on my couch, the TV playing in the background. Just because they're your family doesn't mean they can treat you like this. You deserve better. I wanted to believe her. Some days I did. Other days, I wasn't so sure. A week after filing, my dad finally called. The sound of his name on my phone screen made my stomach churn, but I answered anyway. Alex, he said, his voice tight. We need to talk. We're talking now, I said. Not like this, he snapped. Face to face. Tomorrow. Your mom and I will come to your place. I agreed, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe some part of me still hoped they'd come around, that we could resolve this without it going all the way to court. The next evening, they showed up. My mom looked like she'd been crying for days, her eyes red and puffy. My dad looked furious, his jaw clenched and his fists tight at his sides. They sat across from me at the dining table, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. You filed a lawsuit against us? My dad started, his voice low but full of anger. I gave you 3 weeks to fix this, I said, keeping my tone steady. You didn't even try. We didn't think you'd actually go through with it, my mom cried. Well, you thought wrong, I said. My dad leaned forward, his glare sharp enough to pierce steel. Do you have any idea what this is doing to your mother? To this family? You're going to ruin everything over a few dollars. A few dollars? I repeated, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. This isn't pocket change, Dad. It's $135,000. That's more than most people make in a year. And I didn't even spend it. My mom reached across the table, her voice trembling. Alex, please. We'll figure something out. Just drop the lawsuit. Don't do this to us. I pulled back, shaking my head. I already did this. You did this. You put me in this position, and now you're acting like I'm the bad guy for standing up for myself. We didn't mean for it to get this bad, my dad said, his voice softening for the first time. We were just trying to help Ryan. And what about helping me? I asked, my voice breaking. I worked so hard to get through college, to set myself up for a future. Did that not matter to you? My mom started crying again, but I didn't let it sway me. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice firm. I'm willing to settle. If you can repay the $70,000 you took for Ryan and cover the legal fees, I'll drop the lawsuit. Otherwise, we go to court. We don't have that kind of money, my dad said. Then figure it out, I said. Because I'm not backing down. The room fell silent again. My mom sobbed quietly, and my dad stared at me like he didn't recognize me anymore. "We'll talk about it," he said finally, standing up. As they left, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I hated that it had come to this, but I knew I didn't have a choice. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about standing up for myself, no matter the cost. 2 weeks passed after my parents stormed out of my apartment, and I heard nothing. No calls, no texts, no attempts to negotiate. The silence was deafening, and I wasn't sure if it was a sign of their defiance or desperation. I spent those 2 weeks preparing for court as if my life depended on it. Daniel reassured me that our case was strong. He was confident that the loan documents, bank statements, and records of unauthorized transfers were enough to prove my case. But no amount of confidence could erase the knot in my stomach. My phone finally buzzed on the last day of the 2-week grace period. It was a text from my dad. "We'll meet to talk about settling. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. at Daniel's office." I read the message 3 times, my emotions shifting between relief and wariness. This wasn't over, but at least they were ready to face reality. The next morning, I sat across from my parents in the conference room at Daniel's office. My mom looked worn down, her hands clutching a tissue that was already shredded from nervous twisting. My dad had the same stern, defensive look he always wore when he felt cornered. Daniel opened the meeting with his usual directness. "Mr. and Mrs. Taylor, Alex has given you plenty of opportunities to resolve this matter amicably. Are you prepared to settle today?" My dad glared at him, then at me. "We don't have $70,000 just lying around," he said. "But we've managed to pull some money together." I kept my face neutral, but my heart was racing. "How much?" "We can start with $10,000, my mom said softly, "and we'll pay the rest in installments. Monthly payments." Daniel leaned forward, his expression sharp. "And how long will it take to pay the remaining $60,000? My dad shifted uncomfortably. "We were thinking 10 years. I couldn't stop the bitter laugh that escaped me. 10 years? Are you serious? I'll still be paying off my own debt by then. This isn't some favor you're doing me. This is your responsibility." "Alex, please," my mom said, her voice cracking. "This is the best we can do. We don't have any other options." Daniel held up a hand, stopping me from responding. "Let's be clear about what's on the table. If Alex takes this to court, the amount owed will likely increase to include punitive damages, interest, and legal fees. That will far exceed the $70,000 we're discussing here. Is that a risk you're willing to take?" The room fell silent, and I watched as my dad's jaw clenched. He glanced at my mom, who nodded tearfully. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "We'll pay it off in 3 years. Monthly payments, starting with the $10,000 we already have." It wasn't perfect, but it was something. I turned to Daniel, and he nodded. "We'll draft the agreement. If a single payment is missed, we'll proceed with the lawsuit." My parents agreed, though my dad looked like he wanted to punch something. My mom tried to meet my eyes as we left, but I couldn't bring myself to look at her. The relief I felt after the settlement was immediate but hollow. I'd won the battle, but it didn't feel like a victory. The relationship I'd once had with my parents was in tatters, and Ryan hadn't even bothered to show up. The first payment came through a week later. I used it to pay off part of my student loans, chipping away at the mountain of debt that still loomed over me. It was a small step, but it felt good to finally have some control over my finances. Despite the agreement, my parents' payments were a constant source of anxiety. Each month, I waited to see if the money would arrive on time, half expecting them to miss a payment and force me back into legal action. So far, they'd kept their word, but the damage to our relationship was irreversible. Ryan reached out once, a brief text that read, "Sorry things got so bad. Hope we can talk someday." I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to face him, not after everything he'd cost me. Life moved on in small, incremental steps. My internship turned into a full-time job, and I started saving for a fresh start. I dreamed of leaving Phoenix, of finding a new city where I could build a life free from the shadows of my family's betrayal. One day, as I packed up my apartment in preparation for a move to Denver, I found myself holding an old family photo. It was from my high school graduation, the 4 of us smiling in the Arizona sun. My mom's arm was around me, My dad looked proud, and Ryan was making some goofy face. I stared at the picture for a long time, trying to reconcile the people in it with the ones I'd come to know. They weren't villains, not really. They were flawed, selfish, and deeply misguided, but they were still my family. I set the photo aside, unsure if I'd keep it or leave it behind. Some wounds take more than time to heal, and I wasn't ready to forgive them. Not yet. As I closed the box and taped it shut, I felt a strange sense of closure. My life was mine again, free from the weight of their decisions. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. Sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't feel good. It feels like loss, like breaking something you can't fix. But it's also necessary. And as painful as this experience had been, I knew it had taught me something invaluable. I was stronger than I'd ever believed, and I deserved better than what I'd been given. The road ahead was mine to walk, and I was ready to take the first step.